Psalm 95, come, let us shout joyfully to the Lord, shout triumphantly to the rock of our salvation. Let's enter his presence with thanksgiving. Let's shout triumphantly to him in song. For the Lord is a great God, a great King above all gods. The depths of the earth are in his hand, and the mountain peaks are his. The sea is his. He made it. His hands formed the dry land. Come, let's worship and bow down. Let's kneel before the Lord our Maker, for he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the sheep under his care. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as on the day at Massa in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. For 40 years I was disgusted with that generation. I said, they are a people whose hearts go astray. They do not know my ways. So I swore in my anger, they will not enter my rest. This is the word of the Lord.
Good morning, church, again. My name is Joel. I'm a member here. I also have the joy of serving as one of the pastors and elders. And so it is a joy to gather with you all this morning to remind ourselves of the good news of Jesus. Thank you all for being here. So recently, our family acquired something called a MetaQuest. So if you're not familiar with what that is, it's one of those virtual reality things that you put on and you're like in this whole other world, this virtual reality world. And believe it or not, we bought it to use as a sports training tool. Maybe. We also use it for a lot of other things. So that's what I found out. Like the first time I put it on, I was actually pretty amazed at how realistic it felt when you're kind of in this world. One of the first things we tried was this game where you get in an elevator and you go up to the top of this skyscraper and the elevator opens up and you're just overlooking the city and there's a plank and you're supposed to walk the plank out over the city. And so, I mean, it's pretty trippy how real it is. Has anybody done the walking the plank game? Okay, yeah, those of you that we took it over to the house the other day and did it. But yeah, no, they had done it before that actually. So yeah, if you have one of those, you should go try it. It's pretty trippy. You can actually go watch videos online where they get like an actual plank and put it like a couple inches off the ground so you really feel like you're on it. And bad things can happen, like people will fall off and bust the TV and all these things. Like it feels so real. You can play golf, you can ride a roller coaster, you can fight aliens, about anything you want. You'll be so immersed that you have no idea like where you're really at. You kind of lose yourself. And there's times where you're playing though, it'll kind of get off and wonky, everything will get turned around. And there's a specific button on the controller that you hold down and it kind of just recalibrates everything and kind of puts everything back to center where it's supposed to be. Those of you that are involved in anything regarding like a joystick or some kind of controller, you know how important it is for it to be calibrated. There's something in video games called stick drift. How many know what that is? Okay, yeah. Those of you that play like Fortnite or any kind of like shooter game where accuracy matters, it's like when the joystick is supposed to be at neutral, it finds itself slightly off path. And at that point, it's useless. Get rid of the controller or recalibrate it, whatever, right? Accuracy matters, and so it's important. And left to themselves over time, things wander or they drift or they become misaligned. It's why you have to go get your tires aligned, right, every so often and make sure everything is calibrated. You might, if you work in graphic design, you might have to recalibrate the colors on your monitor to make sure they're true colors or recalibrate your printer so it prints appropriately. And generally speaking, things need maintaining or they no longer serve their original purpose, what they were designed for. In Psalm 95, the author exhorts his hearers to be aware of the tendency for our own hearts to drift, or as he says it, to go astray. Left to our own devices, our hearts wander away from what we were created for, what we were designed for, from the one we were created to live with and for. As the old hymn says, prone to wonder, Lord, I feel it. Prone to leave the God I love. But thankfully, there is a God who throughout history has proven that he will leave the 99 to chase down the one who wanders off. And this is the good news of Psalm chapter 95. This summer, we've been camping out in the book of Psalms. As you can see, we're going to be spending a few more weeks in it before we hop back into the book of Revelation. As you heard read today, we're in the 95th Psalm. It is a psalm that the actual book of Psalms doesn't tell us who wrote it, but the author of Hebrews attributes it to King David. And the psalm is broken up pretty clearly into three sections that each offer an invitation to us. And those three invitations are going to be what guides our time this morning. And they are this. Verses 1-5 is an invitation to joyful song. And then verses 6 through the first half of verse 7 is an invitation to worshipful surrender. And then the second half, or the last line of verse 7 all the way through the end of the chapter, is an invitation to eternal Sabbath or rest. So look at verses 1 and 2 again with me. It says, "Come, let's shout." This is an invitation. Let's shout joyfully to the Lord. Shout triumphantly to the rock of our salvation. Let's enter his presence with thanksgiving. Let's shout triumphantly to him in song. And so the psalm begins with an invitation to joyful song. So America had the privilege of hosting the World Cup this summer. And I'll admit that typically I have a hard time getting into soccer. It's my problem, not soccer's. I just don't understand it. But I did enjoy watching some of the games this year and getting into the different storylines and things like that. And one of the things that I thought was really cool was watching the crowds cheering on their teams, kind of this raucous celebration. And then when a team would win, you would hear them all just whatever. And I don't know how it works. So maybe some teams have a song that they've sung for years and some find a new song. I know for America, it was "Take Me Home, Country Road," right? Isn't that right? They were like singing at the top of their lungs. Like half these people, I'm like, y'all have never ridden a country road, but you're singing it, and so I love it. I mean, they're just learning this song and singing it, and then half the time it's in languages I don't understand or don't know, but still you just see like this full-throated singing, celebrating in unison at the end of a win. It was pretty cool to see. And that kind of atmosphere and celebration is much closer to what is being described in the beginning verses of this psalm than something you might see on a Sunday morning. Okay, and I'm not saying that we should make Sunday morning like the World Cup. That's not the argument here. It's giving context to what this verse is talking about. This is a culture that understood what it meant to triumph after a long, hard-fought battle. And then songs just erupt in pure joy and victory. Kind of think of like maybe a bunch of people sitting around a bar at the end of a battle with raucous singing and these like bar songs where everybody's just cheering. Like that's kind of old school bar songs, by the way, like not maybe what you're thinking about today. But, these songs just break out in triumph because the war had been won. Like that's kind of the vision here. And we're reminded that the rock of our salvation has won. We have been rescued, and this is cause for great rejoicing and celebration and partying. Verse 2 further invites us to enter his presence as we sing. So literally the word enter his presence means to literally meet God. That's the language there. And his presence, the literal word there, is before his face. So we meet with God before his face with great shouts of celebration. So this is not standing behind a barricade at a championship parade, hoping to just get an autograph from one of the players or give them a high five, right? Like this is an invitation to get on top of the bus and pop champagne and join the party and celebrate, right? Like hold up the trophy. Or maybe like storming the field after a big college football win and you're down there dogpiling with the players. Like you're invited to the celebration. This is the invitation to join the victory song and come before him with thanksgiving and gratitude because there is reason for celebration. I love in verses 3-5, you heard them read earlier, we get the reason why we're supposed to sing. And I love this. And it's just because God is great. If you want to give people, like if you want people to celebrate, give them something worth celebrating. One of my pet peeves, and I don't feel like I have, well, I probably got more than I'll admit, but one of mine is, at least within the life of the church, is when church leaders implore a congregation to sing louder, to be more expressive in corporate worship, but the whole service is a focus on humans and a long list of things to do. And I'm like, if you want me to sing louder and get more excited, don't talk to me about humans because it's pretty depressing. Like, give me God himself. Like, don't give me more rules on how to worship. Just lay before me the old story. That's what I'm hungering and thirsting for. Like if you want to get a Messi fan excited, I'm just using random soccer analogies to make it feel like I'm very cultured. But if you want to get a Messi fan excited, don't be like, hey, here's how to cheer on Messi. When he scores, here's what I want you to do. You lift your hands this way, and then you give a high five over here to this. Just roll the tape of Messi highlights. And you'll watch just them get antsy and excited, right? Like watch Messi score a goal, and naturally it's just going to erupt. So if what King David does for us here is just roll the highlight tape of God. He says he stands alone above all other gods as the great king. Like there's no one like him. He's the undisputed GOAT. Like he is the creator of it all. There's no one that can compare. From the depths of the oceans, they are held in his hand, and he owns the heights of the mountains. He's just giving like the expanded list. From the sea to the dry land, his hands have formed it all encompassing, great, literally the word mega, mighty, and it is worth our full-throated songs and acts of celebration and worship. Then sings my soul, my Savior God, to thee, how great thou art. Age to age he stands, and time is in his hands, beginning and the end. Oh, great is our God, so we should worship greatly. No song is too loud, no orchestra too stately to hail the majesty of our King. So lift your voices loud as we sing. This is the invitation in verses 1-5. The greatness, the bigness of our God invites us to joyful song. And then the tone of the psalm shifts as we move into verses 6 and 7. Look at it with me. Another invitation. So come, let's worship and bow down. This is prostrate, literally like falling down. Let's kneel before the Lord our Maker. For he is our God, and we are the people of his pasture, the sheep under his care. And in these verses, the second invitation is offered to us. The greatness of God invited us to celebrate, to song, to joyful song. And here the goodness of God invites us to worshipful surrender. It is great that God is great, but if he's not good, it might not be good news for us. So the posture described in verse 6 moves from one of just exuberance and shouting and victory song to one of worshiping through bowing face down and kneeling before the Lord our Maker in humility and surrender. And what's happening is the powerful, almighty, and great God is now portrayed as personal and altogether good. And the invitation here is to one of awe and surrender, like standing on the edge of the Niagara Falls in silence, because there really are no words that suffice to the beauty of what you're seeing. And again, we're not just invited to kneel and surrender, just surrender. We are told why. In the same way that the path to a joyful song is sharing a vision worth singing about, the path to a posture of surrender is not just telling someone and pulling their arm and saying, surrender or else. It's sharing about the one who is worth surrendering everything to. And the primary reason in verse 7 that the author gives, it can be summed up in this simple but amazing truth. I am his, and he is mine. As the old hymn says, his forever, only his. Who the Lord and me shall part. Ah, with what a rest of bliss Christ can fill the loving heart. Heaven and earth may fade and flee, firstborn light in gloom decline, but while God and I shall be, I am his, and he is mine. And maybe more appropriately to the communal nature of this psalm, because it was a communal psalm. We are his, and he is ours. The thing that brings us to our knees in awe and adoration is not just that God is God, but that God is our God. He is not just the maker of heaven and earth. That's good news, but it's only partially good news if he is not our maker. Like, this is unfathomable that the great God of the universe, the creator of all, is also a God that is good enough to become ours. As Hebrews says, and this is fascinating, he is not ashamed to be called your God. He is not afraid of being attached to you. And if you know yourself like I know myself, like, that's crazy. And not only that, but we are also his. We are his possession. He not only gives himself freely to us, in love, he takes us to himself. This is a union like no other. And we are now free to roam and graze in his pasture of provision. We can feast at his table. We are welcome in his courts. By his goodness, we find ourselves under his care, is how the CSB translates it. That word is literally under his hand. It's the same word that's used that describes the hands that hold the depths of the sea and the hands that formed the heavens and the earth and the seas and the dry land. His eye is on the sparrow, and I know he watches me. Being under, if you think about it, being under the watchful eye and under the hand of an earthly ruler and king is often a nightmare. It's not something we want. We don't describe it. Man, he's always watching me. He's always looking over my shoulder. You know, they're always, micromanaging me. Or, man, you're under his hand, under the boss, just under somebody's thumb, right? But when it's a good and wise king and a good and kind shepherd, this is good news. His watchful eye will follow us even unto the depths of the earth. He will lead us under his hand. And seeing and experiencing this is what leads us to respond to the invitation of worshipful surrender. What other thing would we want to be surrendered to? We all are worshiping something. We all have some kind of maker and master. What other one would we surrender to? And then the psalm continues at the end of verse 7, to the end of the psalm, to encourage the reader that as you've experienced the greatness of God and the goodness of God, to continue in these postures of joy and surrender, which is the opposite of a hard heart. There is humility and gratitude. And so here there's a shift not only in tone, but also in the speaker. Up to this point, the psalm has been authored by what we think is David, most likely, and he's speaking. It's a third party speaking about God. And here, God himself is quoted, and he speaks to us and calls us to a heart that is moldable and humble. Look at the end of verse 7 through the end of the chapter. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts as at Meribah, as on that day at Massah in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested or provoked me. They tried me, they provoked me, though they had seen what I did. They walked through this. And for 40 years, I was disgusted or grieved with that generation. I said, there are people whose hearts go astray. They don't know my ways. So I swore in my anger, they will not enter my rest. The greatness of God invites us to joyful song. The goodness of God invites us to a worshipful surrender. And lastly, the grace of God invites us to an eternal Sabbath. This might not seem like a grace at first glance, but when you zoom out and look at the whole scope of redemptive history, you begin to see that even this warning, even this challenge is a grace to us. This is a people that were familiar, very familiar with their own history. They knew the nation of Israel, how unfaithful she had been time and time again. And so God uses their past to encourage them in their present. Even though God heard and redeemed Israel out of their slavery in Egypt, even though God had delivered them from under the hand of an unjust, oppressive ruler whose heart was hardened, Pharaoh, even though God revealed himself as the one true God and became their God, it wasn't long at all until the people began to complain, to become bitter, to enter into strife and provoke God. That's what these two names, Meribah and Massah, mean, strife and testing. And you can go back and read of that story in Exodus, and it's recounted again in other parts. And there's an irony here. As the people want to go back to Egypt and say, God, you haven't done enough, you aren't good enough, you aren't present enough, they become like the king they just left. If you remember the story, one of Pharaoh's predominant character traits is that his heart was hard. That was one of the primary things he's known for. And here, the people, their hearts become hardened. They want to go back to Egypt instead of entering the promised land of peace and provision and shalom, goodness. And they say, it was better for us over there. And so eventually, God gives them over to what they want. You don't want to enter the promised land? Sure, then you can wonder. You're like, God, why did you swear they can't enter into your rest? They didn't want to. They were the ones that God said, go spy out the land. Go take it. I'm giving you. We don't want. Okay. And this is a grief and anger of being rejected, of being hurt. Like that's, Hebrews actually translates the same word here as grief. God is grieved over this. I've offered this to you. I've brought you out. I've taken you to be my bride. And they reject him. And so like a committed lover who is cheated on, there's a mix of anger, grief, and sadness. God is righteously upset over sin, and he is equally grieved because of the brokenness of his people. And so the people, save for a couple, Joshua and Caleb, they're told they will not enter the promised land, and they wander for 40 years. But the physical wandering, like that's okay, that's bad, but really the problem, it was simply a portrayal of their spiritual hearts, which are always going astray. But even in him not allowing them to enter his rest, as it's described, the promised land in the initial context, which is expanded on as we'll see, there is a grace. He could have fully given them what they want. Go back to Egypt. Sure, I'll start over. He had threatened to do that already to Moses at one point, and Moses intercedes, right? We see pictures there. He could have done that. But there is a grace. God's anger only endures for a moment. And so even though they do not enter the temporary physical rest of the promised land, the thing that was always pointing to still remained, which was an eternal rest and Sabbath that is offered to all. That's why when you read today, if you hear his voice, that is the grace. Today. And if you go continue to read, you see that Psalm 95, the end of Psalm 95 is not the end of the story. And it can't be because there has to be more going on. Like you go back to read the original story. Moses was the deliverer. He's supposed to take him to the promised land. Guess what? He doesn't even get to go in. So he can't be that great. I mean, good dude, but like we need something more. You read further, Joshua does take them into the promised land. But it is very clear that there still is a promised land of rest that remains for all of God's people because it wasn't ultimately just about the physical land. Joshua says all of God's promise, the end of Joshua, you can go read it. They've been fulfilled to you. It's been given to you. But that was just a foretaste to an eternal Sabbath that's entered in by faith alone and by, as Hebrews says, by resting from one's own works and trusting instead in the work of Jesus. And that's the invitation to us. See, all of us do have hearts that are prone to wander and that often go astray. At least I know I do. And most of the time, unfortunately, my response and the response of humanity when we see it is to just try to do a little more tweaking of our lives, just a little more recalibrating. If I can just get a little more discipline in my life and maybe have more structured quiet time in the morning, maybe figure out these rules that I have to follow. Like we may be drifting and we find ourselves wanting to go back to Egypt and worship other gods, but we really just need to get back to work. Like let's recommit, let's rededicate ourselves back to keeping the law, being good boys and girls. Everything's gonna be all right, we're gonna clean it up, we're gonna be okay. But the scriptures are clear. The efforts of humans are never enough. The story that we're told, even in the Old Testament, the prophets, is God goes time and time again to get his cheating bride, and back she goes over and over and over. And in the end, What our hearts need is not recalibration or a simple realignment. We need redemption. We need a brand new heart. Ultimately, we're not just misaligned. We are dead in our sins and trespasses. And this is part of the world we're born into, but it's also part of our choice. We've chosen to willingly walk away and say, send me back to Egypt. Any God but that God. And we need someone to chase us down. Psalm 95, one of the ways it describes this people at the end who have hardened hearts, is that they don't know the ways of God, the ways of Yahweh. The prophets build on that idea, and Jeremiah prophesies of a day when there will be a new covenant and people will be given new hearts that know and follow and love God. And so under this day of the new covenant, it says, no longer will anyone teach their neighbor, know the Lord, because he will be known. It's like it comes with the software. Like it's a whole old heart of stone ripped out and a heart of flesh that is there. You can't go follow enough rules. You can't go study enough. That's not what it means to know intimately God. It has to be taken in from the Spirit himself, and it's part of the software. Here you go. The author of Hebrews makes it clear that this only happens ultimately and finally it's fulfilled in the work of Jesus, the true king and shepherd who gives his life for straying sheep. You can go read all of Hebrews 3 and 4 later. It quotes Psalm 95 quite a bit, this section at the end of Psalm 95. And he's building up this theological argument to make it explicitly clear that the only way to enter into God's rest is through repentance from self-reliance and belief in Jesus. He even says at the end of Hebrews 3, why didn't they enter? Because of their unbelief. And then in chapter 4, verse 7, he says, he again specifies a certain day today. He specified this speaking through David after such a long time, today if you hear his voice. Okay, so now we're quoting Psalm 95, and he says, today is the day, but I'm like, wait, I thought it was the day in Psalm 95. Like today, there's only one today, right? But the idea here is today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. The idea is there's more to come. And this is what he says in verse 8, for if Joshua had given them rest, if that was the goal, that was the part of the promise that you're going to have rest on all sides, that's what the language was used. If that was the goal, which happened back in Joshua before, Psalm, and if Joshua had given them rest, God would not have spoken later about another day. Therefore, a Sabbath rest remains for God's people. It's still there today. For the person who has entered his rest, God's rest, has rested from his own works, just as God did from his. So if God himself isn't too good to rest on the Sabbath, you should maybe quit trying so hard sometimes. And that's not the main point, to just be lazy. The main point there is that your works aren't good enough. So the way to enter into God's rest is to repent and believe the good news that Jesus did the work you could not do. We need someone better than Moses, better than Joshua. And Jesus begins his ministry and says, come to me with another invitation, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Jesus is the one true God that's described in the first half of our psalm. And he's also the fully true human whose heart does not go astray and remains faithful. When we see him, he is the true rock of our salvation. The New Testament describes it as the cornerstone, rejected by his people, but through whom a new people from every nation, tribe, and tongue is created. He doesn't just respond to the invitation to come before God's face, as we read today, to meet him there. He has been face to face with the Father from all eternity, as John 1 calls it. He is God, and he was with God, face to face with God before him. He shows the depths of the seas are in his hands as he calms the raging storms. He stands up and says, I am the true shepherd who call his sheep. Today, if you hear his voice, I call my sheep. They know my voice. If there is any draw to come to the Father, it is not of your own doing. It is because the Spirit is working and you are his. They will come out in and out and find good pasture. We're told no one that is the Father's, I know them. No one will pry them from my hands. It's no accident that Jesus was in the wilderness 40 days and 40 nights before he was tempted by the devil. He is being portrayed on a small scale of the nation of Israel's 40 years of wandering. He quotes even to the enemy, he says, do not test the Lord your God. The same thing Israel was doing. He said, no, don't, it's written, don't do that. He is being portrayed as the true and faithful Israel who will not wander astray, as the true and faithful human who doesn't give in to the serpent's wooing voice in the garden. He remains steadfast. We're told he sets his face. He's determined to go to Jerusalem, not veering one iota from his Father's plan in any way, shape, or form. And he becomes obedient. He surrenders unto death, even death on a cross. He goes into the death that should have been ours alone. He wanders in our wilderness to provide a home of rest for straying hearts. He's the true and better priest who intercedes on behalf of a people whose hearts go astray and don't know God's ways. And he goes down into death, but to bring us up to life. In his resurrection, he leads the triumph procession out of the grave. There is a celebration. There are shouts like, go read Revelation as we've been studying. And he puts the powers of darkness to an open shame. He leads a greater victory than Joshua ever could, inviting those who follow him to triumphant songs of victory and rejoicing. And this is the grace and the invitation. Right now, it is still today. While it is still today, there is hope for you and for me. You are not too far gone. You can fit the description of the people in the last half of this psalm: wandering, gone astray, rebelling, striving, fighting. But you are not too lost for the great hound of heaven to track you down and bring you home. In fact, I'll argue that if you understand that that might be where you are, that's exactly the one that Christ came for. He doesn't call the righteous and those that have it together. He came to seek out, to find and save the wandering and the lost and the sick. Matthew 18:12 says, what do you think? If someone has 100 sheep and one of them goes astray, won't he leave the 99 on the hillside and go and search for the stray? And if he finds it, truly, I tell you, he rejoices over that sheep more than over the 99 that did not go astray. And it's pretty scandalous. Like, I read that and I'm kind of like the older son in the prodigal son story. I'm like, what do you mean? I've been here the whole time. That's not fair. Like, but at the end of the day, like, that's who we all are. And I can attest that this is true, because the only reason I'm standing before any of you today is because Jesus has hunted me down, took my broken, battered, and bruised self, placed me on his shoulders, and brought me back home. It is grace alone from the beginning to the end. And that is what leads us to repentance and faith in him, where we fall and surrender at his feet, where we rest and stop our striving and trusting in our own works, but instead in his perfect work. And when this happens, the Spirit of God, the same one that raised Jesus from the dead, moves inside of us, both individually and corporately as his church, and he makes us new and transformed, a new creation. In part now, we get glimpses of it as we see things healed in our lives and relationships restored and things take place. But then there's a foreshadowing, because in the end, it will be fully new and consummated. The entire earth will be God's home. He will reign as our great and good and gracious King, and we will be home, never more to wander or roam. 1 Peter 2 says it like this: he himself bore our sins in his body on the tree, so that, having died to sins with Christ, we might live for righteousness. By his wounds you have been healed. For you were like sheep going astray, but you have now returned to the shepherd and overseer of your soul. He is watching over your soul. There is an eternal song, surrender, and Sabbath that awaits those who trust in the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And until that day, yes, I may be prone to wonder. I may be prone to leave the God I love. But here's my heart. Watch over it. Take and seal it. Seal it for thy courts above.